Welcome to Stukent Expert Sessions. The presentation will begin shortly.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Next Door. So this is going to be a little bit of a explanation on the weird and wonderful path that anyone can take to becoming an entrepreneur. So I'll quickly dive in with our agenda. Obviously, we're going to have an intro. Then we're going to discuss what it's like to become an entrepreneur, how to plan for success, living the dream of an entrepreneur, filling your pipeline of work, the unfun parts of being an entrepreneur, a little bit of advice, and then I'll wrap up with that. So I'll get us started. And really, before I dive in, I'm going to explain a little bit about who I am and what I've done. I'm dyslexic, so we're going to do this intro part backwards because I'll discuss who I am and what I'm doing right now, and then we'll talk about how I got there and how other people can as well. So I am Danaka Porter, and I'm your entrepreneur next door. Let's dive right in here. So I have a little bit of an entrepreneurial history, and I said it, the entrepreneur next door is really the accidental entrepreneur. I didn't ever set out to be. It wasn't a goal of mine to be an entrepreneur, and I still don't really call myself one either. It started in 2016. I went out on my own. I left my role as a VP and decided to sort of start my own consulting practice in management consulting. So I was sole proprietor. Like, okay, I can do this. It'll make me happier. I'll be in more control of my, time, energy, and effort. That was great. Then in 2018, I actually founded and incorporated Adjuvant Consulting. It's a management consulting business, and it focuses on supply chain and business processes. Then in 2019, I was appointed as an adjunct professor at the University of Lethbridge up in Canada. And then also in 2019, I co-founded Vidanova Technologies, which is a fertility company. In 2020, I began a PhD in cardiology, and I'm still doing all of the other things that I've talked about. So I am still consulting, I am still working as an adjunct prof, and I am still working with my fertility company. I've now just added on a PhD in cardiology. I wanted to improve cardiac software. And then in 2021, I became an author at Stukent. So I've written the Principles of Supply Chain Management, Operations, and now I'm working on the Introduction to Project Management. How does that make me an entrepreneur? Well, apart from like the two companies that I've started, it's just I've continued to develop my career. I don't have a traditional career path. I have many forms of income. And that's part of what it is to be an entrepreneur, is to see places that you want to fill in, or you see a need or hole in the market, and your skill set will be able to fix that. So how did I even really get here to where I am now, obviously with my, I say jokingly, but really it's true, 5 different jobs. So we can start at the beginning with my adolescence. I was just always a very curious person, and generally speaking, an overachiever. And because I was very curious, but also an overachiever, I liked doing a lot of things, but then that forced me to become efficient. I had to learn how to do something the fastest way possible while also still being accurate at it. You couldn't lose that accuracy or reliability. So I, became someone that was increasingly busy. I went through and I got an undergrad, actually a Bachelor of Arts, after I retired from my national team. But it was really difficult to find a job. I had done an interdisciplinary degree. I'd focused on economics and math and environmental sciences and literature. The two primary focuses were more economics and math background. But there was no specific job title. I couldn't just go to, any of the job boards and type in like economist. It was like, no, do you have a PhD? Well, no, I don't. Okay. There wasn't, you go in with engineer. It's like you're a chemical engineer. You go and you search chemical engineering. 87 jobs come up. So I ended up in manufacturing at a really big plant. And I just got to tinker. I had enough authority that I could make some decisions. And because we had production runs every single day, I could make these really cool changes and see the outcome right away. I didn't really realize that this was, called supply chain or part of supply chain until later. But I enjoyed what I was doing, and I was constantly looking for, once again, ways to be more efficient. How could I get more out of less and do more with less, or just have more free time? This actually got me headhunted by some really large consulting companies, and I started and went with one, which was really, really fun. But I realized that consulting at a really large company wasn't for me. I didn't get to have that same ability to be creative or to try things. We were on very structured jobs, and it was sort of like, here's your slide deck. This is exactly what we're going to do. So that wasn't that creativity that I needed. I ended up at a client as the VP, and then I decided that wasn't a good match there. We parted ways, and so I went from always being in these really large companies to suddenly being alone, and that was tough in some ways and really awesome in others, because it allowed me to understand myself. And I understood that my whole, raison d'etre, if you're French, so that the reason why you exist essentially was that I really liked to make things more efficient. I really liked to help and make something better. So as Dr. Jen Riley discusses in her book, you have to know yourself, understand, what makes you tick. Like I said, that your raison d'etre, your purpose, it helps you do what you need to do and see what needs to be changed. So then once you've figured out what your purpose is, or what you drive, what you really enjoy in life is, you can look at yourself and all the strengths that you have that match up with that. So what skill set do you have, or just, the tenacity that you have as in your personality that are strengths. But just as important as looking at your strengths it's important to look at your weaknesses. A self-actualized person is someone who truly understands themselves, not just their strengths, but also their weaknesses. So turning a blind eye to your weaknesses is actually, a weakness in itself, because if you don't understand you don't know your weaknesses, and then you can't fix them. And it's not to say that they are bad. A weakness is just an area of yourself that you haven't explored, or something that you haven't gained skills in yet. So the sooner that you understand what your purpose is, the strengths that you already possess to get you to that purpose, and then the weaknesses, the areas of improvement that you need to look at and nurture to bring up and pull back over into your strength side, the better off you'll be in business. Because there are a lot of people out there, and capitalism can be very difficult. It is hard on the ones that don't understand their weaknesses, as other people will see them. And if you don't know them first, someone else is going to come along and potentially exploit those for you. So being an entrepreneur it's really important to start off with just understanding who you are, what you want to do, the skill set that you have that is in line with what you want to do, and then the skill sets that you need to pull yourself in line with where you want to go. So now that we know a little bit more about ourselves, and hopefully you'll go through and do an activity where you can learn about yourselves, let's start by understanding what you are passionate about. My father always used to say, if you love what you do, it doesn't really matter, because it doesn't feel like work, and the money will always come. So once you know and you understand what your passions are, something that really, really interests you, something that makes you tick, it gets you out of bed in the morning, right? You're excited and really interested in it, then we can look at the problems. Well, what is a problem that you want to solve or fix or change that aligns with your passion? And that rolls up into your idea. Well, as most things, the best way to explain anything is through an example. So let's go to that. So, passion. Well, Otto Roeder realized that uniform slices of bread would be really helpful for his sandwich. He loved eating sandwiches, but obviously it's really hard to slice the bread to an even thickness. You have to pay really close attention, and kind of sometimes they end up on really off angles. And then when you put all the things in between your sandwich bread, it doesn't really line up very nicely, and things can fall out. So, problem, not having an even thickness. Idea, well, let's have an automated bread slicer. Now, the interesting thing about Otto is that his background is as a jeweler. So bread had nothing to do with him, but he understood that this was a problem, and his passion was, having a really good sandwich. And his idea then combined those two. So actually, his first prototype wasn't well received. Bakers didn't like it, nobody bought into it, and it actually ended up burning in a fire in 1917. So literally went up in flames. His next prototype came around 9 years later. He had a little bit of time to recover, to rethink this idea, and it was actually a hit. He had a baker friend who trialed it and loved it and said, "Oh my gosh, this is great." They at first were worried that it would make the bread go stale, or people would think it would be weird, or that maybe some of the bread had been missing, but it actually ended up being really cool thing to have. People loved it. So that's another thing with your entrepreneurship. You don't necessarily need to be in that same field where you currently are to create something in a totally different field. I mean, it does help because you kind of have a lay of the land, but truthfully, you don't need to do that. And I'll discuss this in my next slide when we go through an example of me. So my passion's always been helping people and organizations either get what they, want or need, or improve themselves, something along those lines. I want to help everyone get to that, find their better self. Well, the problem is that large consulting companies don't usually get to customize or implement the work that they do. So my idea, well, I added my passion, which is helping people and organizations, to the problem with the lack of customization and implementation, into having a boutique consulting firm where we did high-end customizations and then we actually implemented our work. And it's been really cool because I've worked with a ton of amazing companies all over the world. And I get to do exactly what I love. And so now I get paid a lot to do it. The other passion project of mine is that fertility company. So again, the passion, helping people and helping organizations. There's lots of people out there that can't get pregnant. They need help. There's ones that would like to or enjoy being pregnant and would love to be a surrogate. The problem is that all the fertility agencies out there have a really hard time finding surrogates and or egg donors. They're really focused on the intended parents, but less so on actually finding those people to fill the space of, gestational carrier, surrogate, or an egg donor. So the idea was that we created a boutique firm that actually focused on educating and finding these surrogates, gestational carriers, and egg donors. And then we would work with the agencies. But we would really just focus our work on finding and educating, a population that would then go on and help other people. So I'm not even a fertility expert, but I have a company in it. So this is that proof that you don't need to be in that area. It is helpful. Obviously, I'm doing a PhD in medicine, so I have access to a lot of research and people. So I can provide, up-to-date information on certain fertility trends and ideas. But again, it's not fully tied to what I do. So as long as you have that passion and you can see a problem and how your passion might, help that problem, you can end up with a really good idea. So let's talk about the execution part of this. You have our idea, and before you lock it in, we want to understand how our idea will actually solve or partially solve the problem that we have found. Part of our idea is understanding, do we actually want to take our idea public? Do we want to end up selling this, and being bought out by a public company? Do we want to, retain private ownership? These are all parts and parcel to your idea. It's not just having an idea, but it's then executing it. So then we need to talk about that business plan. What does this market look like for your idea? Is there a large market? Is there something that's out there that's similar already? How is it performing? And then, interestingly enough, and people don't focus on this, but one of the most important parts of coming up with a new business or coming up with this new idea is understanding why it doesn't exist already. Because there's a reason for that. Sometimes it's the cost, sometimes it's lack of market, but there are definite reasons why the idea that you've come up with doesn't exist. And it is worth exploring that to understand what you are getting into. You want to make sure that you're not going to bankrupt yourself, to go along with this idea and then realize that your market share is incredibly limited, right? So really important to understand, why has this idea not come to market already? Then, you can figure that out. Then we look at our idea and maybe we need to reframe it because we've understood that it's not going to the market for a specific reason. So we're going to adjust that idea around how we can better bring it to market. It's okay to revamp your idea. In fact, I've done that several times with the fertility company and with several other items, and how we consult, or who we consult with, and the topics that we consult on. It's okay to revamp this idea. There's nothing wrong with that. You need to create something that, one, you're still passionate about, but two, that actually makes sense for that market so that you can make money and help people fulfill that whole goal of yours. Again, you want to make sure that during this reframe or identify potential problems, you understand what barriers you're facing when you are coming up with this idea. So what else is going on in maybe your personal life or in the global sphere that can potentially make it much harder for your idea to come to market or for it to make money? We don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to success, and we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to, perceived failure. Oh, it's not selling. It's like, okay, well, perhaps we put it on the market at the wrong time, or this seasonal color just went, out of season, things like that. So it's really important to just sort of understand where and why your, product or your service, your idea is sitting, right? We don't want to just react to something that occurs in the market. We want to have an understanding behind that. Then we can move on to setting metrics and then testing them. Again, setting metrics will help you understand your success or your lack of success, or an area that you need to focus on, right? So you can set metrics such as the number of units sold per day, per month, per quarter, the number of jobs that you've won if you're service-based, the number of hours worked, or the revenue brought in and the actual profit, right? You have to figure out what metrics are important to you and which ones provide information on your actual, entrepreneurial idea. How do you know if you're successful, right? You have to define that in terms of yourself. What do you think success looks like for you? And then set some metrics to measure that. So you have this nice little guiding light. Then you can go to the market, right? You have all of this information behind you. You've understood what you want to do with your idea. You've understood what problem it's solving, what market you are targeting. You've perhaps reframed it, or you have an idea, if this is successful, an area for expansion, things like that. And you know your metrics to say, okay, I do know how to measure if this is successful or not. And so you can then go forward into the market and you can sell your idea. And that's a really cool place to be, because you have all this information backing you up and you have an idea of how it's going to perform, how you're going to do, and what is going to go on. So then once you're in that market, it's really exciting. You can sort of understand the marketing tactics or techniques, and use all those metrics, like I said, to test out your hard work. But whatever you do create, just make sure that it is, ethical, it's truthful and accurate. I've said this a few times, but obviously the world doesn't need any more Elizabeth Holmes or Sam Bankman-Fried, any of those people, because what they did is they sort of said, oh, once we get enough money, we can then make a tweak and then it will be good. So make sure that your idea is really well founded. If you do, are doing something in the bioengineering space or the medical space, that you have done the appropriate tests prior to taking it to market. It will save you in the long run. So now that we have made it, what does that, dream look like? Well, eventually, as someone that's, been successful, the money earned becomes incredibly a lot, but your freedom is still really small. And the energy you give to your company or companies and your idea or your item is, overwhelming. Obviously, we're at 110%, 110%. It's great. But what you need to realize is quite often that you're your own safety net. There isn't something to fall back on. If you're not making money, you're not able to pay the bills. And so you also need to understand your walk away points of when you throw in the towel versus when you can say, okay, I can stick it through for this many more months. So you need to know your burn rate, how much money you're spending each month, and versus what's coming in, and how long that wind, that trail is, until it runs out and you are in a place where you can't financially afford anything. But once you have made it, there's still that lack of freedom. And the reason for that is that you're constantly having to reevaluate what's going on in the market. Why is my product or service, doing well, not doing well? How do I keep it doing well? How much energy do I give? It's like everyone says, oh, if you have a laptop, you can travel and you can go and do all these cool things. Like, yeah, you totally can. However, I also am still tethered to my laptop because there's nobody else. It does stop at me. And even if I've hired people, I'm still the one that is in charge. I'm still the one that has those final decisions. So it can be pretty draining to be an entrepreneur, right? Like I said, you're your own safety net. It stops with you, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. At the beginning, you might be just you and yourself, or it might be you and a couple others. But regardless, lots and lots and lots of time spent reviewing everything that's going on, because there is so much uncertainty. And I mean, even companies that have really made it, point in case, look at Kodak, look at Blockbuster. They're now gone. So it's important to continuously try to understand how your service is or how your idea is fitting in with the market, because that's where you're getting your revenue from. So again, it's just this constant checking on. And if you're not actually doing work for your company, you're doing work on the other side of making sure that there will continue to be work and fun things like that. So let's talk about how to sort of, and I guess ensuring, maybe not the right word, but how to have a better chance of being successful. So like I said, that constant market review is the solution that I've come up with. Is that idea and that passion that I have for that problem, is it still a solution? Is it still viable? Or has something else come along and said, ooh, I like that, but then made it better than yours, right? Are there improvements that you can make? Are there fads that you are a part of that you might not have been aware of? And those fads can come and go, right? So again, understanding where you're sitting in the market and what it looks like. You also want to do this constant financial review. I talked about it on the last slide. That burn rate is understanding how much money you have left in your runway, how much everything is costing you, how much you are bringing in, and then what your profit is looking like. So understanding your fixed costs, your variable costs, how you can save money and how you can, increase your revenue. You really want to understand the trends behind where your revenue is coming from and as well as where your costs are so that you can, mitigate or manage any massive impacts to those. It's also really beneficial to diversify, not just your ideas and your products, but yourself as well. So you can come up with a really cool new shoe. There's a wonderful company out of Vancouver called Bessie. They have these wicked shoes. They started with just one shoe. Now they have socks, hats, 4 different shoes for kids as well, right? They've expanded, and it's just because they realized that people really like having a waterproof shoe. I don't know if you know the Pacific Northwest, it just torrential deluge of rain all the time. And so Vancouver is just north of that border, same weather. And so they created this really awesome waterproof shoe. Well, they took off. And so creating those new product streams, but they would put out, information. What would you like to see? Or what would you like to experience first? So understanding what your market would like to see best, rather than just coming up with something and spitting it out there. And then diversifying yourself. That's what I did, right? That's the textbook authorship. That's the teaching at a university, doing a PhD. It's just I've continuously diversified. I meet new people and I get to learn new things, and I have access to all this information. And then again, it's just multiple different income streams. So this provides that safety net for myself in other aspects, because I have a lot of grant money, and I can see where that is. I can understand what I have in my bank account for the consulting versus what's coming in for teaching. All of these different things, they go together, and that provides that safety net for myself. So diversifying not just your product or service, but also yourself. It always helps to continue to learn as you go and you meet all these new people with these really cool ideas. So obviously all of this can end up resulting in some growth. And with that, there's always some, unfun things, like I said. So getting to the point where you need to hire. Oh, hiring is both exciting and terrifying. Who do you hire? How do I hire them? When do I hire them? Where do I hire them from? And then once they are hired, how do I manage them? Are they supposed to be on site with me? Is it okay if they're remote? How many hours do I want them to week? Am I going to be like a micromanager? All of this stuff, right? Hiring isn't easy. Picking the wrong person can result in reputational damage or massive issues, or losing other really awesome employees because you have one that just really doesn't fit in as well. So it's really important to understand the values of your, now company and your own personal values, and make sure that the team members that you're bringing on reflect your own values. They should be in line with that as well. And so then you can also discuss during that hiring process how they like to be managed. Are they someone that needs like constant checking in, or are they a person that you can give a task list to every Monday and they'll plug through it and they'll let you know, say Wednesday, oh, I need some more work, or actually I need more time. Understanding and having those really open conversations can help with the managing, and also knowing what type of manager you yourself are. Are you someone that needs a lot of control? Or once you begin to trust someone because they've, proved through their consistent work that you can sort of let them go off and do things, right? Again, entrepreneurship is so much about understanding who you are and, your purpose, your values, your walk away point, the strengths and the weaknesses that you have, the areas that you need to focus on. So then it comes down to firing, which is the least fun of anything. So just being aware of the laws in your state, your country, your province, wherever you are, any of that around employment is really beneficial, because you don't want to make the mistake of hiring someone and then you let them go without cause, or with cause but don't pay them out, and then you end up with a nasty lawsuit. So just make sure you set yourself up for success, right? There's a lot of work that goes into being an entrepreneur. You sort of have to be this, person of all trades. You have to know a little bit about the employment law. You have to know a little bit about HR policy. You definitely need to know some, finance and accounting, a little bit of sales and marketing. It's helpful to have all of this experience if you want to do well. So now that we've left that unfun and we've kind of talked about it, we can go back to a little bit of where we are now. So one of my favorite quotes is that growth and comfort do not hold hands. So if you're not growing, you're sitting, and comfortable is not like, oh, it's a cozy chair. It's the fact that your life is where it is and you maybe have goals, but you're not achieving them or you're not reaching them because you haven't pushed yourself outside of that comfort zone. So obviously just keep growing, and you want to make sure that it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be in a little bit of the unknown. It's okay to put yourself out there because that is where you are growing, making some cold calls or going on and doing an interview that, maybe you're not comfortable in front of the camera. These are all really important things to do and to go forward. So if you want to make something happen, like I said, you're going to have to grow, you have to change, you're going to have to get uncomfortable, get comfortable being uncomfortable. So the last slide I'm going to show is this one, and it's just a couple reminders. So going back to starting that idea is understanding the problem that you're trying to fix, that passion, and then the problem, understanding how your fix, so your idea is actually going to solve part or all of the problem that you found. And you also need to understand what you want out of becoming that entrepreneur. What do you want your life to look like? What do you want everything to be? Because that will help guide you down this path, because you can constantly say, does this activity or does doing this or selling this or creating this product align with what my vision is for myself becoming this entrepreneur, right? It's really important to write out your goals. So at the beginning of every year, I write out all the goals for all the different companies as well as personal ones for myself. And then as I come upon decisions, I look back to those goals of like, does this decision, depending on, whatever I say yes or no, how is it going to impact these goals? Is it going to, by saying no, is that going to enable me more time to achieve other goals? Or by saying yes, should I say yes because it will enable me? All those things. It's really important to understand what you want your entrepreneurial life to look like. So setting those goals is really important. But then of course to have that balance between, being realistic and being optimistic. It's great to have rose-colored glasses on and see the world in a really positive light, or, oh, we're going to totally do this. But it's also really important to have that realism of, maybe I do need to shut this idea down. It's not the right time for it, or I haven't got the right, market for it yet, and we need to pivot a bit. So just really having that balance between the realism and the optimism will set you up for a really awesome career. And that brings me to the end. So thank you all very much.